Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode of Time Between Times Storytelling with me, Owen Staton. A number of years ago, I was walking a woodland path near to my home. There, hewn in the side of the mountain, were some old stone steps that seemed to pass through the trees like a long-lost river, snaking and swirling their way down. I had not been this way before, but slowly made my way down through the darkness under the trees, emerging on a larger path, well known to most who live in the area. Suddenly, some movement to the left caused me to turn, and I span around. And there I was, face to face with the strangest cat I had ever seen. It bent its back and hissed its teeth and stared at me. My dog emerged seconds later, and the cat bolted. It was much bigger than any domestic cat. Strange colouring, strange shape. And it sent a shiver down my spine and made me think, what lives in the forest, just beyond the safety of our homes? What resides there in the woods, little known and seldom seen? As a small child, and a very small child, I can remember going to the cinema with a friend and his parents to see a film called Sasquatch. The opening credits involved a thumping footstep through the North American woods, the trees tumbling down, and then this huge, hairy creature emerging from the darkness. I fled my seat and found myself in the foyer crying for my mother. And that fear of the creature in the woods has stayed with me ever since. Throughout my life, I've always found myself turning to books about Bigfoot, books about creatures that live in those dark, forgotten places. Some people see them, most don't. Some believe in them, most don't. Some crusade to try and prove their existence, and most mock from the sidelines. I am a storyteller, and I believe that there must be something magical out there just beyond what we know. Because that's what makes the world a wonderful place. Belief in these things creates somewhere where you can go, where your imagination can be lost in tales, where you find what lies beyond the veil. Today's story is frightening. You have been warned. But in the meantime, sit back, close your eyes if it's safe to do so, relax, and imagine you are sat at your fireplace. The sky is grey outside. It is mild. You look out there and think for a moment, shall I leave or shall I stay here in comfort? The adventurous part of you gets the better. You stand up. You walk outside, you close the door. You feel the freshness of the night. You look around. This is the place you call home, the place you have been for many years. You feel safe here. You know the people here. But tonight, we are going somewhere where we should not go, but feel we must. We are headed to the fire pit at the heart of the forest. You walk to the woods. You've heard stories of things that move in there after dark, of red lights and eyes seen flashing in the distance. But you are not scared. You set foot on the path and duck under the trees and find yourself in another world. You pass the old mossy tower, jump over the babbling brook, and there you see it, the clearing at the heart of the forest. As you approach, you can hear the murmuring of many voices as your friends have gathered there. And you turn the corner on the woodland path, and there you see them. Everyone you want to be here is here right now. Although your life is full of cares and worries, tonight they are forgotten, for here you are, at the time between times, the time it's neither night nor day, but the sun has gone and the sky is grey, the time when the veil between our world and the fairy world grows wafer thin, so thin that for a moment, or maybe just a few moments, you can reach into their realm, and for a few moments they can reach into ours. You see, now is the time that people see lights in the sky. Now is the time that people see the Tylwyth Teg. Now is the time of ghosts. Now is the time of creatures that live beyond our imagination. Now is the time between times. So in this magical time, and it does not last forever, sit back, relax, and join me as the tale-teller rises to say his story, and we all lose ourselves under a tide of tales. Croeso i'r time between times. 100 years ago to this very year, far away near Spirit Lake in Mount St. Helens in the Pacific Northwest of America, a small merry band of prospectors made their way into the mountains, hoping to find treasure beyond their wildest dreams. There was gold in them hills, of that they were sure. Many people had come back from there with fists laden with chunks of gold, enough to spend for the rest of their lives. And this small group of merry men, Fred Beck, Gabe Lefevre, John Peterson, Marion and Roy Smith, made their way laden by bags into the forest. They left behind the small town of Kelso, its lights losing behind them, as they made their way to a hut that had been built for them a small distance from the lake. The day grew long. The night started to fall, when finally they found that old shack in the woods, surrounded by mountains that seemed to stretch to the sky. They opened the lock, for it was rusted and old, and set foot in there, lighting candles which illuminated every shadow, every part of the building. Each of them grabbed a bed, and they soon found themselves fast asleep. The next morning they rose, and there they went to the river, which was only a short walk away, and started to prospect. The first few days were shrifty, shall we say, with very few gold being found. But there was promise, and there was a friendship, and there was a delight in living in this place, so far from civilization, where the stars lit up the sky like it was day. But they started to hear strange sounds, and glimpses of something in the woods. Unnerved by something just beyond vision that would cause the hair on their backs or their necks to stick up, they knew not what it was, until one day they decided to take another trail to prospect in a small stream where few had seldom passed before. As they walked single file along a ridge that was surrounded by drops on either side that seemed to fall into eternity, they passed over the top and suddenly saw something they did not expect. Coming along the path towards them were 4 creatures out of their worst nightmares. They smelt them first, a pungent pong that echoed through the mountains. Each of them was about 7 foot tall, each of them covered with hair, an unruly gait, but distinctly human-like. They seemed to bound along the path, like the great apes from far away, but so much bigger. The men stopped and looked on in terror as the sun reached its zenith, and the creatures stared at them. Their eyes were as red as fire, their teeth long and yellow. The one at the front had a somewhat friendly countenance, and seemed to almost smile at the men as they approached, while the ones behind became agitated. The men had heard tales from the native people who lived nearby for many years, who said that mountain devils lived in these passes. But they had no idea that on this day they would come face to face with these creatures. The men looked at each other, shuffling back and forth, knowing not what to do. The creatures were in front of them on the path, blocking the way to where they wanted to go to find the gold. When suddenly the man who was third back in the line, Fred Beck, shouted, "Duck!" to the ones in front. They instinctively turned to the side, and the canyons echoed with the sound of gunfire. One shot, which hit the creature at the front of the line right in the chest. It staggered back, and a look of fear and anger crossed its face. Another shot, then another shot, and it was a fourth shot that finally dropped the creature, which fell from the path and dropped down into the canyon with a scream and echoed out of sight. The men looked at each other. The remaining three creatures seemed to know rage unbound, and each of them screamed into the day. The men turned and fled back towards the canyon, back towards the cabin, dropping their tools as best they could. They stumbled and tripped and fell as they spluttered their way along the ridge, until they finally arrived back. They piled into the cabin, each of them trying to get through the door first, and then proceeded to board up all the windows and sit in darkness. Each of them was terrified, for now the mountains, the woods, the canyons, the valleys, even the lake itself seemed to echo with the cries of these creatures, wailing for the loss of their companion. The time between times came. The time when it was neither night nor day, but the sun had gone, and the sky was grey. Although all their windows were boarded, they could see that it was getting dark outside. The candles seemed to flicker with an unheralded wind, and they sat huddled around the middle of the floor, their guns on their laps and their heart beating so loud they felt that it would burst from their chests. Darkness fell even further, this time like a shroud. But then out of nowhere came the greatest bang, as a huge rock smashed into the side of the cabin, causing it to shake. Each of the men jumped up, when another rock hit the other side, this time causing a hole in the cabin wall. Fred Beck rushed forward, his gun ready once more, the gun that had caused all this trouble, when another rock hit the side of the cabin, this time smashing through the wall and landing on the floor in front of them. The men started to scream. The men started to cry. The men started to gather round, and Roy Smith rushed to the wall and looked outside. And there he saw it, an ape-like face, glaring back into the cabin, right at him and seeming to look into his very soul. He felt the blood drain from him, and he took a step back, when suddenly two huge, hairy arms reached into the cabin and started to drag him out. The other men thought quickly and grabbed hold of his legs, pulling him back, while Beck opened fire once more at the creature. It felt like the cabin was going to collapse to the ground, when suddenly they pulled their fallen colleague back in. Another rock smashed through the wall, this time hitting Beck on the back of the head, causing him to fall unconscious to the floor. All the canyons and the caverns around the cabin echoed with the screams of the terrified prospectors as the night grew ever darker in what became the longest night of their lives. There is more than one time between times in the day. The second one is known only to those who rise so early to see the darkness and bid it farewell. But when this came, the men finally plucked up enough courage to peer out of the cabin. It seemed like the creatures were gone. Surrounding the cabin itself were footprints, many hundreds of footprints, and more rocks thrown from the mountainside. They gathered their possessions and rushed out onto the mountain paths, and they did not stop running until they found themselves back in the small town of Kelso, where they burst into a bar to tell their stories. Some of the townspeople laughed, some just smiled, and some gave a knowing look. Fred Beck was persuaded to return with some forest rangers, and they found the rocks. They found the cabin wrecked, and they found footprints all around it. Travelling up on the ridge to find the body of the fallen beast, they found nothing. But as darkness started to fall, as the night started to rise, they left for their own safety and never returned again. That place, that beautiful, bounteous place, near Spirit Lake in Mount St. Helens, Washington State, in the Pacific Northwest, is now known as Ape Canyon. And although that happened long ago in 1924, even 100 years later, people still speak of the terrible tale that happened there all those years before, and people from all around the world go there to try and have their own encounter with the mountain devils, the Bigfoot, the Sasquatch, or whatever you wish to call it. Some people mock the tale, saying the prospectors made it up for they did not like living that far away from civilization. But all of them stuck to their stories till their dying days. Do you believe in the Bigfoot, the Sasquatch? I'm not sure if I do, but I know it terrifies me. And I feel happier that it might be there, because I love nothing more than a story just beyond what I know is reality. My name is Owen Staton, and I am a storyteller. You may find more about me at welshstoryteller.com. Follow me on Twitter at @TheOwenStaton. If you wish to support the channel, why not buy me a Ko-fi at ko-fi.com/Owen Staton, or become a member of my Patreon at patreon.com/Owen Staton 7. I thank you so much for joining me here, at the fire pit at the heart of the forest, at the time between times. The time it's neither night nor day, but the sun has gone, and the sky is grey. Take care, my friends. Remember, kindness is king. See you next time. Nostar.